I'm a maintenance worker for a small business. They run all their operations during the day, so I work overnight. It makes my job easier because I don't have to work around them, and vice versa. It's technically just a part-time job though. I work from 8 to 12 on the weekdays. This night, I arrived a little late, but clocked in right away and got to work. An hour went by, and as I was cleaning off one of the desks, the phone in the front of the building started ringing. Obviously the place was closed, and I didn't have any business answering it, so I let it ring through. But a couple minutes later, it rang again, and then again, and again. I knew it wasn't my boss, or anyone else that worked here, because they would have just texted or called me directly from my cell phone. It's not like they were calling right after the place closed either. The services stopped at 6 p.m., and it was around 9 right now. After the 5th time it rang, I walked up to the front desk and looked at the caller ID. It just said, unknown caller. I tried to decide whether to just mute the phone and leave it, or to just quickly answer and let them know we were closed. Ultimately, I didn't want to deal with it, so I just decided to mute it. I walked away from the front and continued with cleaning off the desks. Probably 30 minutes went by, and I had totally forgotten about the phone. I kind of assumed that by now, they had to have given up anyways. It was about 10 p.m., and I was upstairs taking a break in the small coffee room when I heard a sound from below me. It was a beep, just a single electronic beep sound that I'd never heard before. I didn't think much of it at first, until I heard a door open and close. I literally turned my head toward the stairwell and just looked completely stunned for a moment. Who could possibly be coming into the building right now? It was way too late. I was a little nervous, but really hoped that it was just a worker that forgot something. I walked up to the open stairwell and listened for a second before calling out, "Hello? Is someone down there?" I heard subtle footsteps abruptly stop as soon as I called out. There was a pause. "Hello," I said again. My body slowly filled with tension as I started to worry about the possible other scenarios. Then I heard a couple more footsteps getting closer to the bottom of the stairwell. I quietly leaned over and looked down at the doorway. There was a shadow of a man. They were standing still, probably just a foot or two from the entrance to the stairwell. It looked like they were waiting for me or something. After a really unnerving few seconds, I backed away and moved further into the coffee room, then quietly pulled my phone out and called 911. I just hid behind the bar table and whispered to the operator as I stared at the empty stairwell. It only took a couple minutes for the first officer to make it. I heard him come in and yell for everyone to come out. I didn't hear anyone else say anything, and he made it all the way upstairs without seeing anyone. We didn't get any answers until we got hold of the security tapes. Disturbingly, the guy stood at the bottom of that stairwell for several minutes, holding a knife and looking absolutely unfazed by anything. He didn't seem to have come in with the intention of hurting me. Actually, it seems like he had no idea I was there until I called out. However, once he knew I was there, it looked like he was 100% willing to harm me if I came in his way. After a couple minutes, and just before the officer arrived, he left out the front door. I guess the biggest mystery is how he got a key card to unlock the door. That's what the beep sound was. Even I didn't have a key card. I just had a normal metal key. The search is still open for the guy, and I still work there. Hopefully this was just a one-time thing, but it definitely still has me feeling uneasy some nights. My name is John. I'm 23. I work at a 24/7 bar in my town that's known for our pizza and drinks. We don't really have any other food options, but people seem to enjoy it anyway. I never understood why the owners decided they wanted us to deliver pizzas. It's a lot of hassle for probably not that much extra money. But since we didn't really get that many delivery orders, I was always the only driver during the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. On this night, I walked into the place being pretty crowded. There were several large groups, and with deliveries being slow, I was helping out with waiting tables in the meantime. There were a few deliveries I made, maybe once an hour, and at 3 a.m. there was another regular delivery for me to drop off. I grabbed the single pizza and got in my car. The address was 15 minutes away, so I typed it into Google Maps and started driving. Everything up until this point was completely normal. This was just like any other delivery, and honestly, I was happy to get out of the crowded bar and onto the quiet roads. While driving though, I got caught off guard when my Google Maps suddenly said I'd arrived. I wasn't even in a neighborhood. I pulled over on the curb and tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But double-checking everything, this was the address that was on the order. It was for the entrance to a forest preserve or park or something. There weren't even any houses nearby that it could have been mixed up with, so I called the customer's number. It rang for less than a second before they picked up. "Hey, this is John. I'm just trying to deliver your pizza, but I think you've given us the wrong address." There was a strangely long pause as I could hear the guy breathing into the phone before he described my car and said to look to my left. I did as he said and literally saw nothing but a completely pitch black forest. Then I saw something move. It was him, waving his arms in the air to get my attention. He was standing in the forest behind the road. I don't know why he didn't just come onto the side of the road where it was easier to see, or even why he ordered it here to begin with. I got out and started walking over. It was hard not to notice how eerily quiet it was outside next to this forest preserve. There were no cars anywhere and no other people. I found it really odd too that as I walked off, the guy didn't move. Like he didn't meet me halfway. He just stood there and watched me walk across the street and up to the grass just before the edge of the forest where he was at. I stopped halfway through the grass, realizing this was getting really weird. I waved him over to come grab the pizza and pay for it. The guy hesitated, and instead of walking up to me, he looked behind me and on either side, pretty obviously looking for any bystanders. My nerves were really high at this point, which made it hard to think straight. If my mind was clear, I definitely would have just taken off from my car and left. Before I could come to my senses, the guy started approaching me. He was walking really fast and didn't slow down when he got closer. I stumbled back, but it was too late. The guy grabbed my upper arm and started pulling me back toward the forest. He was clearly trying to be quiet though, not yelling or anything, but instead putting all of his efforts into forcing me back. We struggled back and forth for several seconds before I realized I couldn't break free and started punching instead. It only took a few clean shots to his face before he let go, and by then, we were only a few feet from the forest. I took off running, looking back only to check if he was following. I saw him get up and run into the forest, but to my horror, two other guys came out from behind the trees. I got in my car and drove straight to the police station that was on the other side of the block, but obviously the guys had completely run off by then. I actually went back to work after that, explaining what happened to my boss and asking if he had any info on the guy's order. All he had was a phone number, which was already disconnected, and the first name that was most likely fake. After that, he sent me home early with a free slice of pizza, which wasn't exactly a fair trade, but I wasn't complaining. If I'd been dumb enough to walk up to the forest that night, I probably would have been instantly jumped by all three men with no witnesses. Luckily, my hesitance to approach him made it an easier fight to escape, but it very quickly could have turned into something far worse. During a period of my life where I was mostly living on the road, I often made money through house sitting and dog sitting. It was super easy and convenient to get temporary jobs that way, and it also paid me to stay at sometimes really nice houses for several days or even weeks. I was scheduled to dog and house sit at a place in Washington this week. I drove up there on a Thursday and met the owners and the dog. It was a large golden retriever named Apple. She was extremely friendly and loving right from the start, and only an hour after arriving, the owners left for their vacation. With them gone, I decided to explore the house a bit just to make myself more comfortable, as I was going to be there for 5 to 6 days. It was a really large home in a very remote area of the national forest. I mean, this place had to be at least worth $1 million, and it honestly felt surreal to be staying there. That first day, I played with Apple and just got used to the home, then ate dinner and took her out for a walk around 7. The sun was slowly setting, and the whole road I was walking along was a peaceful wooded area. There were no other houses visible in any direction. I brought Apple down the road for about 15 minutes, then turned around and headed back. As we got back to the driveway though, there was a guy. He was walking down the driveway, and as he passed by me, he kept his head down and didn't say anything. He looked like he was 30-ish, with short black hair and some baggy jeans. Now this was a really long driveway. Like it took a whole 3 minutes of walking just to get to the house, but there were no other houses connected to this. So where the hell could he be coming from other than the house? I hurried Apple up to the home and got us both inside, locking the doors just in case. The only thing I could think of was that he was exploring the woods or something and just happened to pop out by the driveway. Seeing him walking away though, I hoped that whatever it wasn't something to worry too much about. Nothing else happened that day, and I went to bed that night around 10. This next day, I didn't do much. I relaxed inside with Apple and watched a movie while eating leftovers from yesterday. I felt like staying up late though, and the house had this really awesome upstairs balcony with a fire pit. So once the sun set, I lit up a campfire and sat on the lounge chair. Apple stayed with me for a while, but she ended up going back inside to lay in her bed. 30 minutes passed, and it was maybe 11:30 when I heard Apple start barking from inside the house. It wasn't just a typical bark though. It was very sudden and frantic. And knowing she was such a friendly dog, this really caught me off guard. I jumped up from the chair and ran inside. She was still barking, and it was coming from the other side of the upstairs hallway. When I looked down, I saw one of the doors to a spare bedroom was open, and I could see Apple in the room with her tail between her legs, staring at one side of the room. I called her name, but she just continued to bark, so I hurried into the room. Her gaze was fixed on a door. I could feel my adrenaline start kicking in as I moved toward it and slowly cracked the door open. It was pitch black in there, and I didn't know where the light switch was, but it was a large walk-in closet full of clothes hanging everywhere. And somehow, my eyes locked on a small gap. There was an eye staring right back at me. For a moment, I froze before quickly slamming the door. I could hear the clothes rattling inside the closet as I grabbed Apple's collar and rushed her downstairs and straight into my car. I drove away, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and called 911. Once cops arrived, I waited anxiously for 10 minutes as they searched the home, but came out alone. The guy had already left. We went over everything, and I told them about the person that I saw yesterday, but that was really all I knew, and I really couldn't confirm if it was the same person. What the officers told me is that the man probably knew the family was going on vacation and thought the house would be empty. What he intended to do is unclear though, and honestly, I'm not convinced that he broke in and hid in the closet without knowing I was there. I think he knew, which only makes it more terrifying. Thankfully, Apple noticed him and got my attention, because without her, I don't know what would have happened that night. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, right in the heart of the city. The high crime rate is no exaggeration, as there's new stories coming out every day about awful things. Living here though, I'd actually never had anything happen to me up until this point, and never even seen anything happen personally. I always felt like whatever was going on was kind of outside of my life, so I tried to go about life as normal. I worked for both Uber Eats and DoorDash, usually on my bike since I was in the city. This day I was doing mostly Uber Eats, and I'd started around dinner time. The weather wasn't great, cloudy and raining off and on, but it's part of the job sometimes, as the money's not going to make itself. Around 11, I found myself pretty far from my usual location in the middle of the city. With the rain getting worse, I was thinking about just biking back to kind of reset my location closer to home, but an order popped up that was too hard to refuse. $30 for a delivery 2 miles away. For reference, I was on the edge of the city where it merges into a more suburban area with small homes and large apartment buildings. It wasn't a nice area by any means, but it was nowhere I hadn't been before. I rode up to the restaurant and got the bag, then strapped it to my bike. As I was doing this, a car's headlights were lighting up the sidewalk I was on. It was parked a little ways down and had been there the whole time. I got on my bike and started heading out, and as I did, I saw the headlights move out and continue behind me. Just a coincidence, I assumed, but as I made a few turns and cycled into the neighborhood, that same car was still behind me. After a couple minutes, I made it to the apartment building that the delivery was for. I pulled up to the bike rack and swung my chain around it, and moments later the car pulled into the parking lot. Now I was freaking out a little. Maybe it was still a coincidence, but I was still a bit on edge about them possibly stealing my bike. I grabbed the order and hurried inside, trying to drop it off quickly. I went up to the second floor and got to the room, then knocked on the door. It was a cash payment, which a lot of people do around here, but was super inconvenient right now. As I waited for them to answer, I looked down the hallway. It was dimly lit and really run down. Paint peeling on the walls, missing ceiling tiles, and even some mold near some of the doors. It was also oddly quiet for such a large building. Quiet enough for me to hear a couple people coming up the steps. I knocked on the door again, but kept my eyes fixed on the end of the hallway. I could feel my heart rate rising, like my body knew something was wrong about this. Then 2 men showed up at the end of the hallway. They were walking toward me, making eye contact, like they were staring me down. The person in the room still didn't open up, but I didn't know what to do. I tried to leave and walk past the 2 men, but they blocked the whole corridor and pushed me back. Then the door swung open. Another man, clearly with these 2, helped force me into their room, slamming and locking the door with me inside. I was screaming for my life at this point, with no idea what was going on. They threatened me and took me into the bedroom, which was completely empty of anything. They tossed me in and locked the door. I sat there in the middle of the small empty room and just felt hopeless and terrified. I could hear the 3 men talking, and they said something about getting both of us into a car. Both of us. I didn't know what that meant. Then there was screaming. Not from the men though. It was from police officers yelling for them to open the door. From what it sounded like, the men didn't put up any fight. I was helped out not too long after, which was when I figured out what both of us meant. There was another victim in one of the other rooms. I guess 10 minutes before I got there, they had done the exact same thing to a different delivery person. They ordered it, followed them, and kidnapped them. A neighbor had heard the commotion and called for help, which is why the cops arrived so quickly. As far as what was going to happen, if nobody showed up, we can't say for certain. None of the men said a word about their intentions, so all the cops can do is assume based on any evidence they could find. Luckily, it seemed like this was their first attempt at something like this, so hopefully it'll be their last. I can't imagine what would have taken place if not for the neighbors saving us. I work for a tech company as a customer support agent on their 24/7 live chat service. Because of the nature of the job, I get to work from home. The downside, though, was that I was an overnight worker. Being in the comfort of my own home and having to pull an all-nighter was a recipe for disaster. This was a regular work night. I had my plugin open on my laptop that automatically receives new chats. I'd probably get 5 to 10 customers an hour, and each chat usually resolved within 2 minutes, so a lot of my job was just waiting. I kept a hot cup of coffee on my desk and had YouTube open on my other monitor. Around 2 a.m., maybe a little earlier, I was helping a customer figure out their refund when I heard something outside. It was a man, seemingly calling out for someone to help them. Something about it sent chills through me, as it sounded like they were right outside my house. Being in the middle of a chat though, I couldn't get up to check who it was right away. Also, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. I had a bad feeling. I continued to help the customer, hearing this man calling out in the background for several minutes. Once I was done, I decided to just look out the window and see what was going on. Whoever it was though, I knew they couldn't possibly need help that bad if they were standing in the same spots for multiple minutes. I went downstairs, and after hearing them call out again, I realized they were somewhere near the back of my house. I went up to the window and peeked through the blinds. My backyard was fenced in, but standing right in the middle was some guy. He yelled a gun, but his body didn't move. It looked unnatural as he was standing there, looking as if nothing was wrong. It was really dark, but I could tell he was wearing a hoodie and dark jeans. I figured it was probably best to just leave this guy alone. He was probably drunk or some kind of druggie. I left the window and went back upstairs. Almost as soon as I left, though, the guy stopped yelling. It kinda creeped me out, like he somehow knew I was there, but I hoped that it just meant he was leaving. A minute later, I got another customer to help. I started typing in my message, and before I could finish, extremely loud knocking suddenly came from downstairs. I could tell from the hollow plastic sound that it came from the back door. I knew it had to be that guy, which now made me nervous. What could he possibly want? Clearly, whatever it was, he wasn't going to leave without it. I quickly finished typing, then picked on my phone and reported the guy to the police. Then I went back downstairs. I looked down the hallway, and immediately I could see him standing at the back door. His face was pressed into it as he stared through the door right at me. He started hitting the door again, and I wasn't sure what else to do, so I kinda just stood there. After maybe 30 seconds, his face fell flat and he backed away. Then he walked through my backyard and climbed the fence. As I watched, though, thinking this was all over, I could see his figure moving through the gaps in the fence panels, and that's when I noticed several more figures moving outside the fence. Police took my account of what happened, and I described the guy as best I could. I think it was a whole group plotting something. Maybe the one guy was just to get me to open the door, and the rest would come after. I really don't know. I just pray this was a random attempt, and not something they were specifically going after me for. If that's the case, then that might not be the last I see of them. I work night shifts at a hospital, specifically in the ER. I'm the front desk worker that typically checks people in, though we still see a lot of crazy things here. Each night is unpredictable. This night started out quiet. We had a few people come and go, but nothing too big happened. I was mostly sitting at my desk talking to my coworker, Amy, about whatever we could think of talking about. Around 2 a.m., Amy went on break to go to the cafeteria, so it was just me at the front counter. Really soon after, like not even a minute after she left, a man came through the front doors. He was wearing a black zip-up hoodie and black jeans. His hair was dark and somewhat long and looked unkempt, like he hadn't showered or maybe had just woken up. He walked up to the counter slowly and had this strange aura about him. It made me feel unsettled. "I'm looking for Hannah Smith." I didn't remember the exact name he gave, but it was a woman's name, and as far as I knew, they hadn't been admitted recently. Still, I checked the records, but I saw no one by that name. The man seemed uncomfortable as he waited. I told him there wasn't anyone here by that name, and that he may need to check other hospitals in the area. He awkwardly nodded and walked out. I glanced at the security guard, who was standing at the other side of the room, and we both made that eye contact, agreeing that that guy was a little strange. A half hour later, Amy came back. The rest of that shift was quiet and slow. I got out at 4 a.m., saying bye to my coworkers and heading out to the parking lot. This wasn't the largest hospital, but the parking lot was really oversized. It was huge, and all the workers were supposed to park in the back to make room for patients closer to the building. As I walked to my car, a weird feeling came over me, and I randomly thought back to that man that came in earlier. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt unsettled again. Maybe it was the eerily quiet parking lot at night. I walked a bit faster, got up to my car, and got in. I tossed my bag on the passenger seat and started driving. I lived about 20 minutes away. The roads were long and empty, but throughout that drive, I still couldn't shake the strange feeling. I felt like I was being followed or watched, yet every time I looked in the mirrors, nobody else was on the road behind me. When I finally got home, I pulled into my driveway and parked, getting out and going in through the front door. I hadn't even taken my shoes off yet when I heard footsteps sprinting up to the porch. They got right up to the door and immediately shook the handle, trying to open it. Thankfully, I always instinctively lock the door every time I open or close it. As soon as they realized it was locked, they stopped. There was a pause before a familiar voice spoke. "Excuse me, ma'am, can you please open the door? I need help. Please, open the door." It was the creepy guy from the hospital. I didn't respond and shakily took my phone out and called the cops. Seconds later, the man bolted away. I looked out the peephole and saw him run down the road and disappear in the dark, but confirming it was definitely the same guy with the black hoodie and black jeans. When cops arrived, I was hit with probably the most insane, creepy, and downright horrifying information. The back door to my car in my driveway was open. He had been in the back seat the entire drive home, which explains how he got up to my front door so fast. Even more disturbing is that he was probably hoping I'd park in my garage, which would essentially give him access to my entire house that night. Parking in the driveway probably caught him off guard and likely saved my life that night. They used the footage from the hospital CCTV to identify the man and found him a few days later. He was some nobody that I'd never met in my life, but he had some strange fixation with me. He had stalked me from outside the hospital for weeks, figuring out which car I drove, and probably just trying to find a night that I accidentally left my car unlocked for too long. Even though he was caught, he never admitted to anything, and just repeatedly said that he wanted to talk to me, and that was it. This was a while ago, but I haven't heard or seen anything about him since. I'm a security guard for a mid-sized office building. It's located right in the center of the city. Around here, crime rates are pretty high, so it's not uncommon for businesses to have huge losses from break-ins at night. I usually have a coworker with me, but during this month I was alone while the company I worked for was training up a new employee. I didn't mind it at all though. Being alone was more boring and made it harder to stay awake. But having a partner sometimes could get annoying, depending on who it is. Anyway, it was around 2 weeks into this month when I was patrolling the lot like usual and noticed a couple guys far off on the other side of the road. They were standing around in the dark, looking in my direction. I don't know if they were looking at the building or watching me, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. The next time I made my rounds, they were gone. I took a mental note of it, but I didn't think about it too much. The rest of the night was quiet. I got out at 6 a.m. with nothing more to report on. The next couple days were uneventful as well, but then one night at the end of the week, I made my rounds outside and saw them again. They were in the same spot as last time, standing in the dark and watching me. It made me uncomfortable again. So instead of continuing my rounds, I stayed out on that side of the building. Maybe if they saw that I noticed them, they would leave. I stood out there and walked back and forth for about 5 minutes before the men walked away. As I was out there, I tried to take notes of what they looked like, but there really wasn't much I could make out from that distance. I stayed out for another 10 or 15 minutes after they left, making sure they didn't come back. Then I went back inside. With them gone, I figured now was a good time to head to the break room and take my lunch. It was about 1 a.m. The break room was at the far end of the hallway in the back of the building. I sat at a table and started eating while scrolling on my phone when I suddenly heard a noise. I put my phone down and looked at the door to the hallway. I'd never heard any noises like that before. After a few seconds, I got up and walked over to the doorway. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, waiting to hear anything, but it all seemed so quiet that I figured it must have been nothing. I went back and finished my lunch. Afterward, I went to the security office and double-checked that there were no alerts or flags. Everything looked good. Usually this was the time of night where I just sit in my chair and wait around, but something in me felt like going to make another rounds. The noise I heard didn't have me nervous though. I think if anything, I was actually just more curious about what it was and found it as something for me to look for while I was bored. I started my rounds outside, walking around the building. It was quiet, just the ambient sound of the buzzing streetlights. Nobody was out there. I went back inside and started walking through the inside of the building. Usually, unless there was a flag or alert in the system, I wouldn't go checking every inch of the place. I'd just walk up and down the hallway and make sure nothing was off. The hallway was long though. It was in the shape of an L, so it was more like two long hallways. On one side was the main door, and on the other side, there was a door to a mini stairwell that had an emergency exit door. It was one that was original to the building, so one of those old heavy metal doors. And as far as I knew, it wasn't connected to the security system because of how old it was. To bypass this, the company just put a huge padlock on it and bolted it shut to essentially make it useless. However, when I got to the end of the hallway and looked through the door window into the stairwell, I was in complete disbelief. The padlock was snapped in half, laying on the ground, and the metal door had been forced open. I felt lightheaded as I hurried back to the security office. If someone had broken in, how the hell did they slip past me unnoticed? Surely I would have seen or heard them. I started scanning through the tapes. I got to the point where I was standing outside watching the two men. After they left, I stayed for a bit to keep watch. During that time, they came around to the back of the building and snapped the lock off, breaking in and going into the workrooms. Disturbingly, they were still inside the building when I came back inside. One of them was just on the other side of a door, literally 2 feet from me, as I walked past him and into the break room. While I was in there, one of them bumped into a desk while trying to hide, which was likely the sound I heard. When I went back outside to do my rounds, that's when they made a run for it. On the tapes, it was pretty clear that they both had weapons, either large knives on their belts, or possibly even small firearms, which makes me think they were prepared to take me down if it came to that. I called the police and handed over the tapes, but nothing ever came of it. They weren't great quality, and the men had their faces covered. The company claimed several hard drives, or files or something, were taken, and they seemed pretty worried about it. However, to this day, there's been no more info on the men or their motives. When I was in my mid-20s, I worked night shifts at a 7-Eleven. I was still doing online school at the time, and I figured most of my shifts would be slow enough for me to get some schoolwork done during my shifts. For the most part, this actually worked out. I'd be the only one there, and it would never really get busy. Whenever someone would come in, I just pushed my laptop aside, and when they left, I'd continue my school stuff. This night, it was very cold and rainy outside, which always made me happy because almost no customers would come in. I had my laptop out and was focused on school for almost 2 hours straight when the front door opened and a man walked in. He looked 30 with a beard and short hair. I put my laptop off to the side and waited for him to come up to the counter. The man looked around the aisles for a minute or two, then walked out, got in his car, and left. Not thinking too much about it, I grabbed my laptop and continued about my work. Another 30 minutes passed when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights pulling up in front of the store. I looked over and was confused to see the same car that was here earlier. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, but when the guy got out, it was the same man. This time he walked into the store and came right up to the counter before I could even move my laptop. "Restroom?" he asked. "Oh, hi, yeah, it's right over there." I wasn't expecting that question at all. He walked over to the restroom and went in. It was one of those single-person ones. It's not like a whole room. I couldn't help but think it was a bit odd to come back 30 minutes later to just use the bathroom. Like there had to be somewhere closer to wherever he was, unless he stayed in the area for the whole 30 minutes. He possibly could have been back to also grab something that he decided he needed. I don't know. I waited a couple minutes, and then a couple more, and then it started to get a little unusual. Honestly though, I did not want to be that guy who checks up on him or knocks on the door or whatever. Another 15 minutes passed, so he'd been in there for almost 25 minutes at this point when a police officer pulled into the parking lot. He circled around and slowed down right behind the other guy's car, clearly inspecting it. And after a little bit, he stopped his vehicle right behind the car and got out. The officer came into the store and looked around the sales floor, then looked at me and asked if I knew who was the owner of that car outside. The officer looked more than just curious. He looked worried. I pointed at the bathroom and said he'd been in there for a while. The officer went over and didn't hesitate to begin banging on the door. It was clear something was seriously wrong. After a minute of him knocking and yelling, he looked at me and asked if I had a key to the door. I was kind of shaky, but I sifted through the drawer under the counter and found the key, then ran in over to him. He unlocked the door and opened it, gun raised. The room was empty. I couldn't believe it. After getting interrogated for a minute, I assured the cop that he had gone in there and never came out. The officer did a more thorough search and happened to notice the ceiling was accessible. It was one of those ceilings that's made up of panels where you could just push them out. I guess the man had gotten on top of the sink and was able to haul himself up. The officer called in backup, and within 15 minutes, they found the man hiding inside the ceiling. They got him out and arrested him. As I've been told, the guy was on the run after doing some absolutely horrible things to several random and innocent people. Earlier in the night, they got a description of his car and caught his license plate on a store camera. The officers made it seem like I was lucky because the past individuals he had harmed were all alone in the middle of the night, either working or just walking around outside. Whether the man was trying to hide in the ceiling because he knew the cops were after him, or he was doing so to try something on me, is unclear. Thankfully, he's locked up for good though. I was working my regular 2 to 10 closing shift at a small drive-through cafe. It's a really small place with just 5 or so indoor seating tables, since most of our business is focused on the drive-thru. This wasn't a busy spot though, especially during the later hours of the day. Being the only one working the closing shift, I'd usually sit at one of the dining tables and be on my phone, only getting up if someone came to the drive-thru. It was drizzling outside this night, so it was even less busy than it already would have been. Past 7 o'clock, not a single customer came through for 2 hours straight. I was just sitting at a table watching Netflix on my phone when suddenly the front door opened. It kind of startled me, as nobody ever comes inside the shop this late. He seemed to not notice me sitting at the table though, because he walked up to a different table on the other end of the store and sat down with his back facing me. Something was definitely off about this guy though. He was very tall and wearing really dark clothing, and although it was only drizzling outside, he was soaked. Water was dripping from all over his clothes and onto the floor, and that got me thinking about how he even got here. No cars had pulled in, so he must have walked. Anyway, I stood up and walked over to the table, greeting him and asking what he wanted. He didn't smile or say hi back to me. He just sat there with a blank look on his face. I waited a few seconds before repeating myself, but he cut me off. He asked who else was working tonight. I was confused, but also slightly nervous about that question, but I still answered for some reason. It's just me, but we close in an hour. He then asked for a small coffee, so I walked back to the kitchen and started making it. I grabbed a cup and poured it in, then turned to go back to the table when I saw him standing in the doorway to the kitchen. "Do you need something else?" He didn't respond. Now facing directly at me, I could see that his eyes were bloodshot, but his face was still blank, like no emotion whatsoever. It made me really uneasy. "Put the drink down and come with me." He was demanding it, and he looked ready to force me if I didn't. This guy was way bigger than me, so I really had no choice. I moved slow, trying to think of any way out of this as I followed him. As we left the store though, he grabbed the back collar of my shirt and pushed me across the parking lot toward the road. On the other side of this empty road was a completely wooded area with no buildings or houses as far as I knew, and that's exactly where he was leading me. Just as we were about to cross the road though, a single car came out and rolled past us. As it did, the man stopped, which forced me to stop, and both of us stared at the car and realized what it was. A police officer looking right back at us. I started screaming, and the guy immediately let go and sprinted across the road and into the woods. The officer pulled right into the parking lot and made sure I was okay, then called for backup. What's crazy is he wasn't even on his shift. He was actually heading home for the night and just happened to see us at the perfect time to save me. If he had even been 30 seconds earlier or later, I would have been dragged into those woods, unseen, and probably never made it out. Anyway, the cameras picked up some decent footage of him, but as of yet, still nothing has been found. I'll update if anything else happens, but I just hope he doesn't come back. This was almost 2 years ago now. I was doing what I thought was going to be a regular vacation to where my parents live. I had rented an Airbnb for the first time, so I was really excited. The house was on a large plot of land and was very spacious and quiet. I lived in the city, so this was like luxury to me. I set everything in the room and pretty much left right away to see my family. I spent the whole afternoon with them before heading back to the Airbnb and making a quick snack, then hopping on the couch to watch a movie for the night. It was like 10 or 11, so pretty late, but in the middle of the movie, I heard someone walking outside the house. There was no mistaking that sound, and it just completely threw me off guard. I paused the movie and got off, quickly walking to the back of the house, looking out the back door. It was obviously dark out, but a guy was walking away from the house and toward the trees that were behind it. What's really creepy is that I never heard his footsteps approaching. Like he must have already been standing by the house for a while before I heard him leave. Once he was out of sight, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The back patio was empty, but along the house, there were clear shoe prints in the grass. I followed them, leading up to one of the windows, and when I looked through it, there was a direct line of sight to the couch I was sitting on. I got chills just thinking about that man staring into the house at me without me knowing. I quickly went back inside and covered up all the windows. For the next half hour, I sat in the living room and continued the movie with the volume on low. That way I could focus on listening if he came back. I didn't hear anything though. Once the movie was finished, I knew I had to get to bed, so I went back up to the window to do one last look to make sure everything was okay. I moved the curtains and saw nothing, but heard footsteps sprinting away from right outside the window. I hesitated before looking out and seeing that same guy running into the tree line. I immediately got my phone and called the police. Of course, by then, he was too far for them to find him, or even really search. However, while we were looking around the house, I noticed that my suitcase in the bedroom was open. It had clearly been searched through, and a few things were even missing. This probably happened while I was with my family, and the guy could have even been still in the house when I came back, only to sneak out of a window before I saw him. Why he came back afterward is what really disturbs me though. If I hadn't caught him watching me, there's a chance I would have gone right to bed, with him waiting right outside the window. This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and backseat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but was also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m. But with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me. But for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around 10, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank. And as I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. But regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. "Hi, do you need something?" I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding. "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself. "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I said okay, then the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it though, the more crazy that man seemed just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something, so I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows, and once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all. Almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess. Or at least that was what I assumed he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount, and then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying, basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a ripoff like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped in my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that. Very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops, and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road, going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car in the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by, then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking, why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible this situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. Please.